Energy media readers, we have been talking for the last couple of weeks about the oil and gas support package that the federal government is pulling together. We thought, based on a Globe and Mail story, that it would be here a couple of weeks ago. Might show up this week, but we're still not sure, nor are we sure what's actually in the package. To give us, to have a chat about this and see maybe if there's some insights from Ottawa, we're joined by Senator Paula Simons. So welcome to the interview, Paula.
Very nice to be here.
So give us what you know or what you think about this package.
Well, this is the fascinating question, because people may remember that about 2.5 weeks ago on March 25th, when Finance Minister Bill Morneau spoke to the Senate, he said that there would be help for the energy sector within hours or perhaps days. I mean, within hours. That sounded very promising to a lot of people. And in the aftermath of that, I spoke with Energy Minister Seamus O'Regan and, Natural Resources Minister Seamus O'Regan, who gave me to understand that there was something in the works, maybe something to do with support for cleaning up orphan wells, which would put oil field service workers back to work and deal with environmental liability at the same time. And then the days went by and the days went by. And yesterday, which is to say Saturday, Minister Morneau was back in front of the Senate in Committee of the Whole. Now, most of the senators were not there. Most of us are sheltering in place in our home cities and provinces. So it was my colleague, Doug Black, who is a senator from Calgary, who had a question which was asked for him by Senator Vern White, who's from Ottawa. And so the question posed on behalf of Senator Black was, where's the bailout that you talked about from 2 weeks ago? And watching on my live stream from Edmonton, I was quite taken aback to hear the minister say words to the effect that that they want the recovery package to be what he called sector agnostic, which is to say that oil companies, I was given to understand from the minister's own words that what he was saying was that oil companies will just have to make do with the same bailouts that everybody else is getting, the 75% salary top up, for example. And I was quite taken aback, because that was not the impression that Minister Morneau left when he spoke to us on March 25th.
Yeah, and I had an interview with Greg McLean, who's the MP for Calgary Centre and a longtime veteran of the oil finance industry. And he'd written to Finance Minister Morneau with some very, very specific suggestions, and they were actually, I think, rather sensible. And they were exactly the opposite of sector agnostic. They acknowledged that they were, you can watch the interview, and I won't go on at length about it, but it seems to me that the government is almost paralyzed. It doesn't know which way to go on this. And there's also the debate around, should they support oil and gas, or should they put most of the money into clean energy? What are you hearing about that?
Well, I think that's very much the case. I mean, when I tweeted about this on Saturday, there was a lot of pushback from people at me, and I'm not usually perceived as being a shill for big oil, but people saying, why should we give them anything? They had their chance to make money. And, a lot of schadenfreude, people almost hoping that this will end in the shutdown of the energy industry in Alberta and in Newfoundland. And that's not helpful perspective, but I was quite stunned with Minister Morneau's statements before the Senate this Saturday, because they seem to be antithetical to what he had said to the Senate on March 25th. And I can only assume that they're getting a lot of pushback from people who are saying, why should we have supports for an industry that, if it's not dying, ought to be dying?
Let me give you my perspective on that, because I've written a little bit about that lately. And that is, one of the reasons why we should preserve oil and gas, and particularly natural gas and heavy crude around the bitumen, is because there's a lot of research being done about turning those hydrocarbons into materials, or turning it into hydrogen, which is, has no carbon in it at all. And if we allow those firms, those big companies, that are the pillars of the industry, to be really damaged, or even to fail through this crisis, then we will not have an opportunity going forward to take advantage of those, those new economic opportunities. And
well, I mean, I think that's a very strong argument. But I mean, even in the much shorter and medium term, I mean, you know, I don't think most people in Quebec know that 60% of the oil that province uses comes from Western Canadian and Western United States. I mean, comes through Line 9B. I'm not sure how much Ontario realizes what percentage of their oil comes from Alberta and from Western Canada. I mean, I think that if people fondly imagine that the world can run on fairy dust, I mean, I believe we need to transition to a low carbon economy. When I hear people talking about zero emissions, vows like that always make me a little bit itchy, because I think, you know, shooting for the moon sometimes leads to a lot of cynicism when you fail to hit the target. But absolutely, we need to be transitioning towards a lower carbon economy. I don't think you can get there by driving the truck off the cliff.
Well, I want to run something by you because I'd be curious to get your reaction to it. I've been arguing for a long time now that the industry and the Alberta government needs to have different narratives that align the Alberta oil and gas industry more clearly with the global energy transition, the climate crisis, with the intent in other provinces in the federal government to implement stricter climate policy. We can't be seen to be in such opposition to it. We need to align ourselves more with it so that people will go in Quebec or in BC, go, oh, okay, I understand why Alberta is, you know, consistent with what I believe as well, and I'll lend them my support. And we have not taken that view so far. So from your point of view, sitting as a policymaker, as a lawmaker, what do you think of that argument?
Well, I mean, I believed that before Rachel Notley became premier, and then Rachel Notley did precisely what you describe. I mean, I think, and I thought she was doing it about as effectively as it could be done to make the argument that Alberta needed the runway to get to the point where it could transition. And I think that, you know, she was an excellent advocate for that point of view. And I thought she and her environment minister, Shannon Phillips, got a lot of traction in Ottawa behind closed doors, but not enough. And then, you know, it was all too easy for Jason Kenney and others of Rachel Notley's critics to say, you know, you keep talking about getting that buy-in, you keep talking about getting that social license, and when is the social license going to be granted? And I think it's very unfortunate that, you know, I had assumed, perhaps naively, that if Notley made that argument effectively and well, that it would change hearts and minds, but it didn't. And so, you know, I can understand if Jason Kenney, for his part, says, well, why would I try that path? It didn't work for an ambassador like Rachel Notley. How is it going to work for me? So
let me throw you back at you some of your own words from a previous interview that you and I did. And you were
that's
talking.
Not fair.
I know, it's awful. I don't have a very good memory, but I remembered this. So you were telling me, we were talking about Bill C-69, and you were talking about how Notley and Phillips had come to Ottawa to lobby. They appeared before your committee, and they did an excellent, excellent job. And in fact, they did change hearts and minds around on your committee. That led to material changes and amendments to the bill. And it seems to me, what little I know about how Ottawa operates, that more of that over an extended period does change hearts and minds. And there might have been, the problem here was not that it wasn't done and didn't have a success, it just didn't happen long enough and have enough success to bear itself out now in this debate around the support package. What do you think?
Yeah, I know, I think that's very much the case. I mean, I think also that people need to think about what this means, not just for Alberta's economy and not just for oil and gas producers, but what it means for the national economy. I had a very sobering conversation last week with the parliamentary budget officer, whose job it is to go through and cost various federal programs and to also look at the monies coming in. So he was costing out both the costs of the COVID-19 recovery package, but also the impact of oil prices on the federal budget. And it is sobering indeed. I think sometimes Albertans forget we have a little myopia of our own about how bad this is going to be for us. I think Canadians, on the other hand, need to open their eyes and realize that at a time when Canada is going to need capital to get our economy up and running, to put back the pieces after this COVID shutdown, if the money isn't coming in from oil and gas revenues and from Alberta income taxes, the the federal budget is going to take a significant hit at a time when it needs all the resources it can get. So, you know, people who are dancing on the graves of Alberta's oil industry, you know, they're cutting off their noses to spite their faces.
Fair enough. And I think that our conversation has given readers a bit of an insight into the complexity of this issue. There are so many issues to weigh and priorities to weigh, and a changing global energy system, and COVID-19 and the oil price war between, on and on and on. And it does, and I suspect that that has a lot to do with why the federal government is dragging its feet on this support package. And I guess we'll see what happens this week.
You know, and I really don't know what was in Minister Morneau's head when he said that help was coming within hours, because clearly he had something in mind. And I don't know, because A, I'm not in Ottawa. I've been in Edmonton since March 13th. I wasn't there on March 25th. But I don't know what happened within his office, where there was a breakdown in communication, because on March 25th, he seemed to have something quite specific in mind, whether that dealt with providing more capital liquidity, you know, more debt relief, whatever it was, oil field cleanup. And this is why yesterday, as I say, I was quite astonished at his response to Senator Black's question. However, I also know that, you know, in fairness to Minister Morneau, what he said yesterday is that they've done 5 years of policy work in 5 days. And, you know, the number one priority had to be to get the money to the workers. And if oil companies are relieved of the stress of having to make payroll, that will help them too, by extension. But when he started talking about sector agnostic programs, I understand that it's tough to cherry pick, and I understand that everybody's ox is being gored in this time of crisis. But I think, you know, as an Alberta independent senator, I was disappointed and I was taken aback, and I did feel that it was reneging on a pledge.
Fair enough. And Senator Simons, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate it. Always a delight to talk to you. And no doubt when the package does come down, we'll be chatting with you again. We'll see what they bring in.
Yes. Well, and meanwhile, everybody stay well and stay safe. And stay home.